We arrived in Darwin and had to perform the first of 2 rapid antigen tests in order to be allowed on the cruise. The morning of boarding was the second. Thankfully, we passed. There were 2 passengers for the trip that tested positive for COVID and were not allowed to board. We then boarded our home for the next 2 weeks, the Coral Geographer. The Coral Geographer is an Australian expedition and adventure ship less than 2 years old. It had all the feel of a cruise ship and all the luxury, but carried a maximum of 120 passengers. It had wonderful public spaces where events and the lecture series were held. It carried 2 60-passenger boats they called Explorers that were loaded and lowered with an elevator from the back of the ship. For smaller spaces, they had 6 Zodiac pongas. It was a beautiful small ship designed for these types of cruises. It brought back many fond memories of past cruises with family. Our itinerary took us from Darwin through the northwestern part of Australia, called the Kimberleys. It is an area about 1/4 the size of the United States, but with only about 20,000 inhabitants. Many of the areas have returned to their Aboriginal ownership. It was to be a unique adventure in this wild, untamed, and remote part of the world.
Our first stop in the Kimberleys was the King George River. At sunrise, we arrived at the mouth of the river and anchored. We then boarded the Explorers and went upstream through canyons of ancient red sandstone, 1 billion years old. We traveled upriver towards a point where the King George River plunges over the cliffs. The 26-story high waterfall, now being called by its original name, Omari, instead of King George, is the highest twin falls in Western Australia. The Explorers were not designed for the next part of the trip, so we boarded the Zodiacs they had awaiting us at the base of the falls. We drove as far as we could into the canyon towards the base of the falls themselves for an up-close view, getting an early, very wet, shower. The crew said they had never seen so much water going over the falls, due to the recent cyclone that passed through to the south. back to the ship, discovering an osprey nest and a crocodile taking a shower. It was an amazing day. The next day included a tour to see Mitchell Falls. The falls are a set of 4 cascades, remote and isolated in the park, with only 2 ways of visiting them. One is to take the long, dusty drive to the campground, then hike 10 kilometers back into them, or take a helicopter. We were using helicopters. We were taken in Zodiacs and dropped off on the beach, where we waited our turn for the trip to the falls. The helicopters came out of what seemed nowhere and landed on the beach, where we rushed to board them and buckle in for the flight. We were flown over the stark but beautiful terrain until we reached the falls, where the pilot made a figure 8 over them so both sides could see the falls. The copters had their doors open, so you could hang out and take photos. It reminded us of the Angel Falls flight. We landed near the falls, and we were given about an hour and a half to walk the trails back to the falls. We even had time to cool off and swim in the river before the helicopter returned and flew us back to the beach. Enjoy our flight to Mitchell Falls. In the afternoon, we visited our first Aboriginal rock art location, the Wandjina Rock Art Galleries of the Warora people. It was a bit of a scramble up the rock outcrops, where it was located in a small cave-like opening. Wandjina are cloud and rain spirits depicted with large upper bodies and heads that may show eyes and nose, but typically no mouth. They are about 4,000 years old. There were a few even older ones, called Jian, that are dated to up to 35,000 years old. The paintings were mostly on a low ceiling, making them a bit of a contortion for the photographers. We returned to the ship and sailed overnight for the second half of our Kimberley adventure.